one of the things that you need to think about is, now that you have tools set up on your computer for working on the web, is how people are actually going to see the pages that you produce. And in order to do that, you need a web server. And usually, that's not a server sitting next to your desk. There are rare exceptions to that. Usually, it is a service that's hosted. So what you need is a web host. If you're taking this course for credit in one of my classes, you already have access to a host. In fact, you have access to one of the types of hosting I can talk a little bit about, and that is a shared host. So there's a whole spectrum of hosting that goes from the very heavy duty and very expensive to the fairly light duty and fairly inexpensive. For this course, probably you are using a server that is hosted by DreamHost, and DreamHost is one of the larger shared hosts. DreamHost and Bluehost, I think, are the two big ones trying to kind of, well, actually they're fairly similar, but they tend to eat up a large part of the shared hosting market. So that shared hosting means that you have a bunch of people all using the same computer, all using the same server or group of servers. So the problem with that is that there's an advantage, which is that especially if you're if you have a site that you only have a few hundred or a few thousand hits on every day, or tens of thousands of hits, it will provide that capacity when you need it, and when you don't need it, you're not paying for it. And the disadvantage to that is if there's a large number of sites, all of which become popular quickly, then you'll find your own site slowly slugging along. And that's a problem that DreamHost has, and Bluehost has, and any shared host has. The other advantage is that they're very, very inexpensive, anywhere from $3 or $4 a month up to $10 or $12 a month for a relatively large amount of memory and bandwidth, because again, they don't actually expect everyone to use all that memory and bandwidth, all the storage space and bandwidth. The place where you might see the largest bottleneck in both of these kinds of, in shared hosts in general, is if you have a lot of processing going on the computer, on the server side. So, for example, for WordPress, it doesn't really take that much processing to kind of generate a WordPress document and have it published to the site. Drupal tends to eat up a lot more CPU time, tends to make a lot heavier use of the server, and there you might feel it a little bit more. You might feel the sluggishness a bit more. So what happens when you when you find yourself way too slow in a shared host? The next step up is probably something called a virtual private server, and in this case you're still sharing the server with other people, but it doesn't feel that way from your side. It acts as if it's your own machine. And so even though there may be 8 or 10 or 15 people or more people on the same physical computer, it splits that computer into virtual machines, and so you have your own kind of virtual machine. And since you never actually see the server room when you're buying hosting for the most part, it doesn't really matter whether it's an actual computer or multiple computers if it's set up properly. That tends to be more expensive. At the low end, something like $25, and can go up to several $100s a month for a virtual private server. The next step, of course, is to have your own server, usually co-located in a center. And so you can have your own server sitting beside your desk, of course, but the advantage to having it co-located is that, at least in an ideal situation, they have a good power setup, they have the room cooled, and they have a really nice a big pipe, a nice high bandwidth connection to the internet, and usually a technician that's there 24 hours a day, so if a server goes down, they can just kind of pull it out, fix it, and put you on another server very quickly. And so there's some serious advantages to colocation. That way you're not having to worry about getting the connection up to your own building, and you don't have to worry about things usually like patching the system and keeping it running, and some of the security issues are sometimes handled depending on how much management is involved in the colocation. And then finally, if you're working for a large company, you might have a server that is actually in your in your building, and you might have an IT support staff that will help you keep that running and make sure that it's secure and that sort of thing. So there's a whole spectrum there, from the very expensive, your own IT staff and a high-end server. I guess somewhere in there is also kind of the distributed server, where you have not just a co-located machine, but machines that are distributed in various places across the globe, so that you have a short amount of time that people have to wait for a file to be delivered. This is particularly important for example, for delivering media. If you're delivering video, it's very helpful to have the server actually physically, geographically closer to the client. So there is kind of this other very high end of server support. For most of what you'll do, you're probably going to be working in a corporate setting where you guys have your own server, or you'll be doing something a little more freelance, and you'll likely be using, to start with, shared hosting, and maybe if you get pretty heavily into it, a virtual private host. How do you decide whether the host has what you need? We're going to be using in this class an approach, or a server setup that's usually called LAMP. LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and we'll say PHP. So what are those? Those are kind of 4 programs. All of those are free programs. That is, they are both open source and freely available. You don't have to pay for them, so it makes sense that the host would have those. There's other reasons that it's good that those are good to use. They're very widely available. There tends to be a lot of support out on the web for people using that kind of a setup. It gives you a lot of flexibility to use other kinds of free software. So there are significant advantages to using LAMP servers. Just real quick, we'll kind of touch on what those pieces are. Linux is the operating system at the very base level. It's what you install on the server, and it's again a free operating system that's based on the Unix architecture. Then on top of that is A for Apache. Apache is the program that actually does the web serving. It's when you ask for a file, it's the program that goes out and grabs that file and does whatever you need to do with it and sends it down the line. Apache is probably the earliest and most successful open source project. M is for MySQL. At the very end of the course, we'll be talking a little bit about databases. And MySQL is an open database that's fairly widely used. There's several different kinds of open databases that are used, but I think MySQL is probably getting a larger part of the market share at this point. And then the last is the P, which is the programming language that you use for your web, for creating programs for the web. And in this course, we'll be touching only very lightly on PHP, which has become a very popular programming language for creating web applications, and for enhancing basic web pages as well. Are there alternatives to this? Yes, the largest, I think, alternative is a commercial server like Microsoft's server, and the Microsoft kind of stack. They have their own database, system, their own programming languages that all kind of fit together. And so this is also popular. And there's a good chance that if you're in a corporate setting, you might see that. But if you're doing development outside, especially on the social web, it's less likely that you'll see that. Again, as always, if you have questions, put them in the comments, and I will see you next time.